Hey guys, it's Petruis here. Sorry I haven't done a live video in a while. It's been very busy. I know I said I was going to make 2 to 3 videos all week. Well, every day all week, that is. But for the past 2 days, I was having appointments. The first appointment was a therapy appointment. And I'm going to be talking about that therapy appointment in this video. And I had an eye doctor's appointment scheduled at the last minute. But I didn't have the eye exam scheduled until yesterday, which was the 11th of August 2015. Then I probably would have made a video on Monday, the 10th. But then again, I probably would have either way not made a video yesterday. So I apologize for possible false advertisement. So I am in my room. I'm obviously sitting on my bed because it is 4:50 in the morning and no one in their right mind would really still be awake. I don't even know why I'm doing this live, but probably there are some people from other countries who watch my videos. So if you're in a different time zone, it is 4:50 a.m. in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So just to give you a little hint of how early the time zone is where I live. So today's topic, this video's topic, is being LGBTQ plus. And some of you are probably like, well, what does that have to do with being back to school? This, to me, has always been an important subject because back in 2010, the suicide rates were high with LGBTQ plus students because of bullying. And there have been lately suicides that have happened with members in the LGBTQ plus community. Leila Alcorn was one of them. She was bullied by her own parents. She was 17 years old. Her parents put her into conversion therapy, and she committed suicide because her parents refused to accept the fact that their daughter is trans, that their daughter is a trans female. They absolutely refused to accept their child as their daughter. And they wanted her to convert and deny her gender identity so they could have their son. With me, being a trans man and being in college, when I was in high school, I didn't come out as transgender. Although I've always knew that I was a guy, but I was born biologically female. I've always knew since birth that I was meant to be a guy. But I was born back in the 90s, back in the early 90s. I was born in 1993. And for those of us who were maybe born like in the 80s or 90s, we all know that back in the 90s and like the early 2000s, you could not talk about gender identity at all. You know, sexual orientation was talked about, but gender identity wasn't. You know, like if a child were to say back in the 90s, back in maybe the mid 90s, were to say if they were born female, say I'm a boy, and kept saying it, parents would keep saying it's a phase. Same thing with children who were born male who kept saying that they're a girl. Parents, again, would keep saying it's a phase, and children would keep confronting these kids who kept saying that they're not the gender that the doctors tell them they are. And this leads to bullying when kids start putting gender roles on other kids. We grew up, us 90s kids, grew up with gender roles being placed on us. And it's still happening today, unfortunately, that parents are pushing gender roles on children. Speaking of gender roles, Target is now getting rid of labeling of boys' toys and girls' toys, or girls' clothing and boys' clothing, because gender roles put a negative effect on kids. When I was a very young child back in the 90s, I remember parents would get mad when those who were born male would play with baby dolls. It didn't matter if they were cisgender boys or if they were trans girls. You know, if you were born male and you played with a baby doll, parents would freak out because that was a girl toy. And you know, if you were born female, regardless of your gender identity, if you were biologically born female and you played with Hot Wheels, parents would freak out because that is a boy toy. I got bullied as a child in school and outside of school because I absolutely refused to play with Barbies. I absolutely did not like Barbie dolls. I actually would rip the heads off or bite their feet. You know, there are probably some people who are going to be like, oh, well, now wonder why you're transgender. The toys that I've played with has nothing to do with my gender identity. And what I absolutely cannot stand is when kids in elementary school are saying the same thing to other children. And this isn't all children, but bullying is still an issue, regardless if they're LGBTQ or not. I mean, the kid could have a parent in the LGBTQ plus community. I have been a CIT at a camp where some kids had two moms and they were bullied because they have two moms. And it's really sad how parents teach their kids prejudice. And this sends a negative message to kids once they get into high school. Honestly, I don't feel it's necessarily social media's fault. A lot of people will probably blame social media. I personally blame politics for, how do I explain this? I personally blame politics for having a lack of education when it comes to the LGBTQ plus community. And I personally blame the media because from what I saw, the media only really looks at cisgender white heterosexual men. And for those of you who don't know, there's actually a movie about Stonewall coming out. And there is a lot of flack about it, and it is absolutely inaccurate. There's a lot of inaccuracies that are featured in the trailer. One of the inaccuracies show they show a white cisgender man throwing the first brick, when in reality the person who threw the first brick was a trans woman of color. And I am an actor, and I was actually in a show that was written by youth about pride, about the beginnings of LGBTQ plus pride. And we actually interviewed people who were around during that time, and we actually read stuff about it. What's really sad is public schools don't teach about Stonewall, and they don't teach anything that involves the LGBTQ plus community. They don't really read books that are by gay or lesbian authors or bisexual authors or trans authors and so on, because being LGBTQ plus to many public schools is very taboo, and it shouldn't be taboo at all. It should actually be accepted, because when we see stuff like Kate, when we see stuff like news stories about Caitlyn Jenner, and we see positive news stories about her, that sends a positive message to our children. That sends a positive message to society. But when we see negative stuff about Caitlyn Jenner, and we see people calling her Bruce, that sends a negative effect on children, telling children that trans people do not exist. When we see videos of pastors promoting killing LGBTQ plus people, we send a very negative message to society. We are promoting violence when we promote killing. And not only that, but we also promote bullying in schools. When we see a video of a pastor promoting hatred. I'm not saying all pastors are like this. I'm saying that lately there have been stories about pastors, mostly very conservative evangelicals. And recently there was a story about a Catholic priest facing up to 3 years in prison in another country for promoting the killing of gay people. And this absolutely sends the wrong message to children and teens, regardless if they go to a public school or a private school, because the behaviors that children and teenagers have, they get their behaviors from the adults. They get their behaviors from people who they look up to as role models. Because science shows that children will repeat everything someone says. They'll imitate the actions of an adult or imitate the words. Same thing with teenagers. I remember doing a paper for English 102 one time at the college I currently go to about violence in the media, and if violence that we see on the media promote violence in real life. And one of my evidence to prove that was saying that children and teenagers imitate things they see or hear. Good example, the Bobo doll experiment. That's a perfect example, and some people may think this is a little off topic, but if you really were to, if you're watching this after it's being recorded live and it's posted on YouTube, you can see that, okay, yeah, he does have a point. When I was in high school, I kept my gender identity a secret, and for those of you who are just watching, I talked about how I've always knew I was a boy when I was a little kid, but because I was born in 1993, which would be considered as the early 90s to most people, you know, you couldn't really talk about it in the 90s or early 2000s about your gender identity. People never really talked about it until after Caitlyn Jenner came out. Now people are all of a sudden talking about gender identity. But when I was a child, I've always knew that I was different from everyone else. I always knew that I wasn't a girl. I always knew I was a boy, and I always knew that I have been attracted to women, and I still do till this very day, and I still am trans, and that is never going to change because this is how I've always been, and this is the way I was born. I was born this way. But when I was in high school, I could never come out as transgender because the high school I went to was very conservative, and there has been a history of racism, homophobia, transphobia, religious intolerance at my old high school. So I was like, okay, I'm going to keep my mouth shut about my gender identity while I'm in high school. But I did admit my attraction to women. And the first person I told, I was 15 turning 16. So it was like my sophomore year of high school. And what happened was I was on my old YouTube channel, which was years and years and years ago, and people probably have never heard of it because, well, you know what I mean. It's so old I don't even remember the name of my old channels. And someone sent me a message saying that they liked me. They pretended to be this girl that was a year younger than me that went to my high school, and they said that they really liked me. And I messaged this person on Facebook saying, I got your message on YouTube. It turned out it wasn't them, and it turned out to be someone from the football team pretending to be this girl from another grade who was like 2 grades behind him, but was a grade behind me. And I was pretty much outed. And I remember crying that somebody found out that I'm attracted to women. But the rumor was always been that I'm attracted to women. And those rumors were true. And they're still true today, that I'm attracted to women. But the rumor about me being a lesbian is not true. I am a straight man. I identify as a heterosexual man. But I couldn't say that when I was in high school because, remember, this was like 2009. This was before we got into the 2010s. This would be still considered as early 2000s. And remember, back in the early 2000s and throughout the 90s, you could never talk about gender identity to anyone. So I kept my mouth shut. So I basically said to them, yeah, it's true that I'm a lesbian, when in reality, I'm not a lesbian. I'm a straight identifying male. And I was actually planning to wait to come out about my gender identity until I went to college. Well, it took me a long time to come out as transgender. And I came out this year around Easter time. Why? Because the other 2 schools I went to the one college for only 2 weeks, and I left because there was a lack of diversity. And then I went to a community college for a while, and I left because it was like high school all over again, and I didn't want that in my life. And then I transferred to another school, which is the school I currently attend, and I really like it. They're very accepting. They're not judgmental, and it's a very safe campus, and I feel safer there. While at the other 2 colleges, I did not feel safe there because of my gender identity. I felt that I could not come out when I attended those two colleges. But as soon as I started attending the college I'm at now, I'm like, okay, yeah, it's time to come out. And the reason why I'm talking about the LGBTQ plus community and the Back to School Week video that I'm filming right now live, it's because back in 2010, there were so many teenagers killing themselves because of bullying. And bullying is a huge problem in America, especially bullying when it comes to the LGBTQ plus community. Uh, kids are beating them up in the hallways. Kids are committing suicide. It's sad. And the reason why these things are happening is because we have leaders who are sending negative messages. And recently, I just wrote to Pope Francis. I'm hoping to print up the letter. And I talked to him about how, sending negative messages about LGBTQ people in the Vatican and sending, like, anyone, regardless of their religious beliefs, anyone who says negative things about LGBTQ plus people sends a negative message towards our youth. Because you would figure these people would be role models and, tell people to love everyone. But then you see stories about a priest getting arrested for promoting violence. And then at the same time, here are students, regardless if they're in a private school or public school, acting on violence against their peers who may be in the LGBTQ plus community. So my advice to those who are LGBTQ plus, who are going back to school or going back to college/university, my advice to you is come out whenever you feel is right. If somebody's bullying you, report it. And if the school doesn't do anything, then attend a school board meeting. I wish I would have done that when I was being bullied, simply because I'm a member of the LGBTQ plus community, but I never thought of that until now. I didn't even know that the school board meetings were public until recently. I thought only parents and alumni could attend the school board meetings, but turns out that anyone can attend school board meetings. So if you're being bullied and you report it and the principal or some kind of administrator that is lower than superintendent and lower than school board, please go to the school board meeting and talk about the bullying issue that's going on. That's my advice. Also, go to a teacher you can trust, because there were many teachers that I could trust when I was in high school, and there were many teachers that I did not trust. It just, sometimes you can trust teachers and then sometimes you can't. So go to a teacher who you can trust and tell them about your situation. That's only if you feel comfortable. If you want to come out, but you're scared to come out, I suggest telling a teacher first before telling your family, or tell like a really good friend first before telling anyone else. You know, that's how I came out when I was last semester. I came out to, like, this person was not very close to me, but I knew I could trust this person because they actually seemed like they were trustworthy, and they were absolutely trustworthy, and they were very accepting about me coming out as trans. And before I came out as trans, when I was a sophomore in high school, I admit that I'm attracted to women, to someone that I used to play softball with. And if I wasn't such a scared kid back then, I most likely would have came out as trans. But I didn't, because I was so scared of being bullied, and I was so scared that I would get kicked out of school. If I did not have those fears, I probably would. No, not probably would. I actually would have came out as trans. But I ended up waiting so long to come out. So all I can say is it does take time. Some people come out sooner, some people come out later. It depends on your comfort level. You could come out while you're in high school. You can come out while you're in college. There are people who come out while they're in elementary school, and there are people who come out when they're in middle school. Some people come out when they're very, very, very young. You know, it, again, depends on your comfort level. This is it for this video. I'll probably be doing another video in a few, so stay tuned.